Thank you again. Great to be here. Now, when we talked about what I could present, I suggested, how about product roadmaps? How about product roadmaps in an agile setting? So that's what I'd like to focus on for the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have the fishbowl and see what other questions you have and where you'd like to take the conversation. And there are two things I'd like to do. The first one is just to very briefly share what product roadmaps are, at least in my mind, and then talk about some tips, share some tips for using roadmaps in an agile context. Cool. So, what are product roadmaps? What is a product roadmap? Now, I don't know about you, but it's beginning of February, and okay, today was a nice day, admittedly, here, at least in Munich, but it's generally miserable, the weather, and cold and rainy. I think it's the right time to think about a summer holiday, if you haven't done so, right? Feels the right time for me. And where could we go? Where could we go? Where could we go? Somewhere nice and warm in the summer. Maybe somewhere where we can take the kids, if you have kids like me, children. Maybe somewhere in Europe, not too far away, where we could drive to. A nice beach, so we can chill and relax, spend some quality time together. How about this place down here, in southern France, near the Spanish border, Agilists, I believe it's called. And I'm told it's a beautiful beach, and if you're like me, if you get restless after hanging out at the beach for a few days, you can head to the mountains and do some walking or cycling or running or whatever you fancy. So it's close to the Pyrenees. Now, I live in the UK, just outside London, in a little place called Wendover, and I've learned from hard experience that it tends to be a good idea. This is the ghost of the machine. Do I need to wave now or something? What was the magic trick? Or just wait. There you go, just wait. So I've learned the hard way that it's a good idea to do a little bit of upfront planning, to think about the options that I have in order to get to a holiday destination, and do a little bit of literally road mapping. Now, this is Google Maps, but of course you could use another map product, even an old-fashioned paper-based map, to think about, well, how could we get to southern France? And in my case, the first decision is really, should we take the ferry or should we take the shuttle? How do we get across from the UK to France? And then should we drive via Paris or Lyon? And even if we drive via Paris, there are different route choices. So which motorways should we use? Should we use the motorways? It's a long journey. This is like 13, 14 hours driving time with the kids in the back of the car. Or maybe I should book a hotel, and if so, where should that hotel be? And if not, maybe we should have a bigger break. I think it's useful to think about how the journey could unfold, not in detail, but sort of the key milestones along the way, anticipate that. And I would suggest that you should do the same thing for your products, for your digital products, that you anticipate as much as you can the journey you'd like to take your product on. And capture that journey. And that's exactly what a product roadmap wants to help you with. So, a product roadmap is a product plan, a strategic plan that wants to communicate how the product is likely to evolve, how it's likely to develop and grow, maybe over the next 6, 12 to 18 months, depending on how far you can realistically see. And it typically covers several major releases or product versions. So I think about something like Windows 10, or I guess I have to add it, just to be fair, iOS 10.2 or something. So a major release or product version that creates a tangible benefit that is typically noticeable to the users. So don't worry, you can happily use continuous delivery and product roadmaps. The continuous delivery is great to push out small incremental enhancements, feature optimizations or bug fixes, maybe run some small minor tests, and then the roadmap would simply communicate, okay, what's your goal for the next 2 to 3 to 4 months, and then the next 2 to 3 to 4 months afterwards, where you want to take your product, what you like to achieve. So it's the bigger picture that you'd like to address, the bigger picture that you'd like to paint. And for me, that's beneficial. That's beneficial for a number of reasons. So this is trying to sell you product roadmaps. No, not really. So. Why should you bother? For me, a higher level strategic plan, an overall plan, provides a continuity of purpose. So if you just think in terms of the next few days, the next few weeks, the next cycle, the next sprint, or the next couple of sprints, sometimes that's quite short-sighted and it can feel very hectic. And sometimes it's easier then to lose focus, to work on too many different things or move in the wrong direction. So that should give you a continuity of purpose. It facilitates stakeholder collaboration. I don't know what your experience is, but I find that the product backlog is often too detailed and there's too much change in the backlog. It's too volatile for a management sponsor or somebody from marketing or sales or support to really see where you want to take your product and what you want to do with your product. So the product roadmap tends to facilitate that conversation much better. So just to give the key stakeholders an idea of what you want to do with the product and what the impact on their work is, the contribution that they have to make in order to have successful releases and a successful product. It helps with prioritization. And if you've ever been in a situation that you have to say no, important stakeholder comes and says, "Oh, must deliver this feature," and you think like, "Oh man, there's no way I can't do this." So you have to push back and you have to say, "I'm so sorry, but we can't do it." Now, if it is a truly important feature and a truly valuable feature, well then the product roadmap provides you the opportunity to take a look at the bigger plan and say, okay, well we can't do it in the next 2 to 3 months, but maybe there's an opportunity to do it later in the year. Let's take a look at the roadmap together and see if it would fit onto the roadmap and how we could change the roadmap to accommodate the new feature. It unburdens the product backlog. So if you have a strategic plan that paints the big picture of where you want to take your product, you can have a more focused, concise product backlog that only looks at the next major release and maybe focuses on the next 3 to 6 months. And everything else is covered in your product roadmap. So again, many product owners, many teams, many organizations I've worked with suffer from overly long and complex, elaborate product backlogs. By complementing the product backlog with the roadmap, that's one way how you can correct that issue or address the challenge. And I'll talk more about the relationship of the roadmap and the backlog in a few minutes. And what else do I have? If you have to acquire a budget for your product, then that's what a product roadmap can help you with too, as it should demonstrate the benefits that your product is likely to create over the coming months. And finally, it can help you with portfolio management. So portfolio will be something you essentially you're seeing here on the screen. So I'm using Microsoft Office PowerPoint in order to show you my little presentation. And Office is like a suite, a product family, a product portfolio, a group of related products. And so in order to identify and manage dependencies between those products, again, product roadmaps can be very helpful. They can help you coordinate releases. So a number of benefits, and as you can tell, I personally like to work with product roadmaps. I think they're powerful product management tools. However, I think there are a few things that we should take into account in order to apply them effectively in an agile setting, in a dynamic environment. And so there are a few tips that I'd like to share with you. But, I know we're going to have the fishbowl, but are there any sort of fundamental questions up to this point, or you're fairly happy? It looks like you're okay, so I'll continue. Good. So, tips. Here we go. So the first one is to focus on goals, not features. Now, I don't know if you've worked with product roadmaps in the past, but traditionally product roadmaps essentially map features onto a timeline. So pieces of functionality onto a timeline, and sometimes those features can be fairly detailed. Now, I don't think that's a great idea when you are in an environment that's characterized by uncertainty, risk, and change. I think it's better to focus on shared goals and work with what's referred to as a goal-oriented roadmap. Now, I'll show you one specific type of such a roadmap. You don't necessarily have to use that structure, but I've come up with it, so I thought I might as well show it to you. And as the goal is the most important element in this roadmap, I'd like to start with it. And by the way, you see here the rows, those are the roadmap elements, and then you would have columns, and those columns would represent your major releases or your product versions. So it's typically a table format that a roadmap utilizes. You don't have to structure or depict your roadmap that way, but it's just the usual way it's done. And it tends to be quite all right, quite effective. So goal, the idea is that you, before you add any features to your roadmap and discuss states, maybe that you first ask yourself, why should we invest time, money and energy in building a new product or a new product version? You know, what's the point? What's the point? So what's the purpose of offering that release, providing that release? What's the benefit it should provide? Or maybe what's the problem it should address? So for instance, maybe you want to get rid of technical debt and future-proof your product. That could be a good release goal. Or maybe it's about making your product, getting your product ready so you can address a new market or a new market segment. Or maybe it's about increasing user engagement by improving the user experience. Or maybe it's about reducing cost. You know, that'll very much depend on what you want to do with your product, what your overall strategy looks like, where your product is in its life cycle. But the idea is that you have tangible goals, specific goals, that tell people this is what you want to do with your product, and that's why it's worthwhile spending time, money, and energy. So that's the purpose, that's the motivation, you could say. And it's great if that goal is shared. So if everybody who needs to contribute to making the product a success feels that's sensible, yeah, that makes sense. Metrics. Metrics is the next element I'd like to discuss with you. It's nothing bad. Sometimes when I say metrics, people go like, "Ooh, metrics." The idea really is that you simply state success criteria, so you can measure if you've met your goals or not. So, if we're talking about removing technical debts, then how do we know that we've met our goal? So maybe we can have a code complexity target that we want to state. And we measure code complexity, and if it's still over a certain threshold, we haven't met the goal, so it needs to be under a certain target. Or if we're talking about acquiring new users, then wouldn't it be a good idea to say, who should those users be? Should they come from the same market segments or a new one? How many new users do we want to acquire? And how soon after the release has become available do we expect to meet our target? So that'd be good to state. And by using metrics, you ensure that the goals on your roadmap are specific, that they're smart, specific and measurable goals. It's cool to have lofty, visionary goals. That'd be your vision, right? I mean, that's vision is an aspirational goal. That's cool. But I think when it comes to product planning and product roadmaps, you should really make your goals specific. So you know if you're meeting your goals, if you're hitting your goals or not, how you're doing. Now I do like features on the product roadmap, but what I would suggest is that you derive your features from the goals. So the goals should come first agree on the goals, and then derive the right features. Ask yourselves now, what does it take in order to meet those goals? So if I want to acquire new users, do we have to add new features? Do we have to optimize existing features in order to meet that target, in order to meet that goal? So it's more about capabilities, it's more about deliverables, and don't try and describe the release completely and in detail at this stage, but rather focus on the 3 to 5 most important features. 3 to 5 most important features, and keep them at a very high level, keep them coarse-grained and rough. The details you'll find, at least at some stage, in the product backlog. So I'm stressing this point because it's a common mistake in my mind to work with product roadmaps that are too detailed, and then you have a significant overlap between your product plan and your product backlog, and that's not advisable. It just makes it harder to keep the two plans, the two artifacts in sync, and it's confusing. It makes it harder to see where you want to take your product, makes it harder to paint the big picture of your product journey. Now dates, I don't know how you feel about dates. This is the target date or time frame. Some people really advise against adding dates on roadmaps. Personally, I like to use dates, particularly on internal product roadmaps. So roadmaps that you use in order to facilitate the development of the product, but also to align marketing, sales, and other internal functions. Now, the reason that I like to use roadmaps is that often there's a trade-off between dates and goal. And you have to see if you can actually fully meet your goal at a certain date. As I said, make a trade-off decision. So I think it's valuable to be aware of that and take a good look. And the second reason is some products are simply seasonal. And so for instance, take consumer electronics, must have them ready for the Christmas sales, or Many years ago, I did quite a bit of work in the healthcare industry, and at least the healthcare products I've worked with back then, there was a big trade show in the US. I think it's still there, RSNA, and you had to have a prototype or early version of your product ready for RSNA to showcase it, so you could then launch your product afterwards. So again, that was a no-miss date. And if that's the case for your products, I think it's important to express it and make it explicit on your roadmap. However, if you work with an external roadmap, that's used to a certain extent as a sales tool to instill confidence in the marketplace. You've got some great plans, and there'll be some amazing benefits and some cool features that you're going to offer to your customers in the near future. Then you may want to avoid dates, and you want to use some loose time frames, something like now, or the second half of this year, next year. So you still use some time frames, but that'd be very vague. And then the last row is very boring, I'm afraid to say. It's just simply an identifier, so you can give your releases a decent name. Now that's just one way how you can build a roadmap, particularly a goal-oriented roadmap. So that was the key recommendation here: focus on goals, not on features, and try and establish shared goals that are specific and meaningful to everyone involved in the development effort for your major releases. So for the next 2 to 3 to 4 months or so. However, if the roadmap resonates with you, then go ahead and download it from our website. It's available for free. Cool. So that was the first tip. The next one that I'd like to discuss with you is the relationship between the product backlog and the product roadmap. And I'd like to recommend to start with the roadmap and derive the product backlog from the roadmap. So one of the interesting things about the product backlog in agile models, and particularly an agile model like Scrum, is that Scrum doesn't really tell you where the product backlog comes from. You just have an idea, and certainly the older Scrum literature then talks about a vision without clearly defining what it is, and then whoops, there it is, there's the product backlog. Of course it's deep and it's beautifully prioritized, and it's got the right level of detail. Of course it's emergent and estimated and all the other good things, but where's it come from? So I like to first establish, a higher level outlook. Describe the likely development of the product, the likely journey, the big picture, paint that, and then derive the product backlog from it. And again, as a reminder, the product backlog is a strategic high-level plan, covers multiple releases, and then the product backlog, in my mind, is best used as a tactical tool that contains epics and user stories and maybe other artifacts, user interface design sketches or some mock-ups, maybe some workflow diagrams or storyboards or story maps, various artifacts that may be necessary, particularly if you develop a UX-rich products. And so I like to start with the product roadmap and use then the goal of the next release to essentially scope the contents of the product backlog. And so, okay, what's the goal? That's the goal. Then we've got some features. We can copy those features into the product backlog and then start breaking them down into epics. So that way your product backlog is derived top down, and it's derived in order to meet a specific goal, a specific release goal for the next 2 to 3 to 4, 5, 6 months, depending on what your release cycles are. However, don't forget that changes in the product backlog can influence and shape the product roadmap. So if you're finding, for instance, that your progress is slower than anticipated, then you may have to adjust your product roadmap. Or if you find that the goal that you're working towards maybe isn't quite as relevant as you thought it'd be, then you may even have to change that goal and make some bigger changes to your product roadmap. So for me, the nice thing of using a roadmap and the backlog is that you have this division of labor, a plan that's focused on the strategic aspects and a plan that's more focused on the tactical elements, but the drawback is you need to keep them in sync. But it's just like all things in life, right? There's always a plus and a minus. Good. So that was the backlog and the roadmap. The next thing, the next tip is about getting to an actionable, a realistic roadmap. I mean, like any plan, you'd like your roadmap to be realistic and actionable. I would suggest, how do we do it? Well, by thinking about the product strategy first and validating that strategy. So going back to the road trip example. Now, what I said is that the sort of the overarching vision of having a family holiday together, spending a good time, and then the strategy that I've suggested was to drive to southern France. However, we could have chosen a different mode of transportation. We could have investigated to take the train or fly or be more ambitious and cycle to southern France. Now, it might take a little bit longer, but hey, take a little sabbatical or something. So those would be different strategies. Or we could have said, well, southern France, why southern France? Cornwall. Hey, Cornwall, why not go to Cornwall? Yeah, sterling is down. Holiday in Britain is great and cheap, so why not hit the Cornish beaches? Yeah, just as nice as the French ones, or nearly as nice. Yeah, so that's what I mean by strategy. So being clear on what is the value that your product creates, more specifically for digital products. What's the value that your product creates for the users and customers? What's the problem it addresses or the benefit it generates? Who are those users? Who are the beneficiaries? How does your product differ from competing offerings? What sets it apart? And what are the business goals? Why is it worthwhile for your company to invest in the product? How does it help you? Does it generate revenue, like in the case of Microsoft Office, for instance? Or does it help sell other products or services? Or is it there to help you reduce cost and increase productivity, maybe by automating business processes? What's the business goal? What's the business benefit? So that's something you have to figure out first, and you should have nailed that and be confident that you've answered those questions correctly before you then come up with the product plan. I mean, there's literally no point for me to start looking into or booking ferries and hotels if I'm not sure that traveling to southern France by car is the right thing to do, right? No point. It's a waste of time. Yeah. So same applies to your product roadmap. Just be aware of that. Yeah. And then both artifacts here, the overarching strategy and your product roadmap, essentially describe your product strategy, strategic artifacts and strategic plans. Next tip. One tip follows the other. The next tip is about road mapping with the players. Who are the players? Well, the idea is here to take a collaborative road mapping approach. However, when I talk about collaborative road mapping, people say to me, well, who should we collaborate with? And I say the key stakeholders, and people say to me, well, who are the key stakeholders? And those are really good questions. So here's one way how to answer those questions. It's the power, the interest power matrix. And I find that a useful tool to do a little bit stakeholder analysis and figure out who the key stakeholders are. So essentially, it gives you 4 quadrants depending on how much power and interest people have. So, somebody has a lot of interest, typically takes a lot of interest in your product if the individual is affected by your product. And somebody has a lot of power if the individual can influence product decisions or possibly even veto product decisions. So people who have a low interest and low power are called the crowd in this model. So the crowd, who could be the crowd? Can you think of anybody who might be in the crowd, at least for your products?
End users?
End users possibly. So it's a good one. Let's see what the next one is. Yeah, the next one will be subject. Somebody with a high interest but low power. So I'd say I'm a subject when it comes to Microsoft Office. So I'm affected by it individually in my businesses because business subscribe to Microsoft Office. But I don't think Microsoft is necessarily that interested in my personal opinion. And crowd would be maybe somebody who works in HR, who works in finance, and doesn't really take any particularly interest in your product and doesn't really use your product. And, it's just affected by it very remotely because it generates revenue for the business. And so with the crowd, you usually don't have to worry too much. So it's usually enough to inform people, maybe send out a quarterly newsletter, or give people access to your wiki web or whatever. Collaboration software you use in order to communicate the progress that your product is making. With the subject, where you could consider inviting them to a bigger review meeting, sprint review meeting, if you use a process like Scrum or if you use Kanban, an operations meeting. Again, maybe a bigger quarterly one. So you create some visibility, but you also give people the opportunity to voice their ideas. With the context setters, well, those are typically senior people in the organizations. I think of head of sales or head of marketing or head of development, head of IT. They typically want to be consulted, so maybe you want to invite them for a cup of coffee or ask them if they would join you for dinner and then share your plans and listen to their advice. Yeah. Of course, they're very welcome to come to the sprint review meeting, but they might be simply too busy. Yeah. And then the people who you should actively involve, I would suggest, in the road mapping activities are the players. So those people who have an interest and influence the product, influence product decisions, influence the product success. So the development team, for instance, but representative from marketing, sales, support, or management sponsor as well. Yeah. Now, the reason that I suggest to involve the key stakeholders, the players, in the road mapping effort is in order to leverage their ideas and creativity. Now, that's going to be very beneficial for you if you're the product owner and you do the road mapping, or you lead the road mapping effort. But also to get their buy-in. Right? I don't know how you feel, but every time somebody just hands me a plan and says, "Here it is," I feel like, really? You sure that's right? And so there's a little bit of resistance. Yeah? So is this really the right thing to do? And it feels really different when somebody invites me to contribute. It doesn't mean that the product owner doesn't have any ideas where to take her or his product, but inviting the key people to share their ideas, their experience, and maybe also to voice concerns. Maybe the ideas that the product owner has, aren't feasible from a technical perspective. Maybe the development team simply doesn't have the skills or the capacity to meet those goals. The goals maybe are too ambitious, too aggressive, or maybe marketing can't support all those releases. So one of my clients really experienced that, where development. The Agile started in development and then spread to product management, and then they hit the next bottleneck, and that was really marketing. And marketing couldn't support all those releases that the organization had started to pump out, right? And so it's important to understand that. It's important to know that you've got an actionable, realistic product roadmap. Yeah. However, if you have multiple cooks involved in preparing dinner, then I think it's important to understand who really has the final say if you can't reach consensus within a reasonable time frame. And while I do think consensus is very powerful, sometimes you don't have the time to use a consensus-based decision-making process. So let's maybe quickly reflect who again were the people involved in making product roadmap decisions. Certainly the product manager, product owner, to me they're virtually the same. Maybe a discussion for later for the fishbowl session. Then the development team, marketing, sales, maybe a product manager, product owner from a related product. It could be a subject, maybe somebody from service and support, management sponsor, and users and customers if an external roadmap is used, or if your roadmap is externally visible. So, quite a few people, quite a heterogeneous group. They all have their own perspectives. And sometimes they have some selfish business unit specific interests. So I think it's important then to have one individual, the product owner or product manager, who really leads the road mapping effort and literally, or in the end, owns the product roadmap. Yeah. So if no consensus can be achieved, then I think it should be the product owner, product manager who has the final say and makes the tough decisions. So yeah, collaboration does require leadership, something we shouldn't forget. Yeah. And then I don't know if that's really a big issue for you. I find it sometimes is for teams. How do we determine cost? And you've got two choices when it comes to figuring out what is the cost of building a product as laid out in the product roadmap. One is to do it the traditional way, and now try and look ahead for the next 12 months or so and write detailed user stories, or start with the epics, then break them down, write detailed user stories, and then anticipate velocity, like, how fast could the team go? But then don't forget, if you work with a model like Scrum, you also have to anticipate the likely rate of change in the product backlog. It's even harder. And then you come up with a figure, and it's precisely wrong, and you've spent maybe weeks, or at least days, doing all this upfront work, or you just spend a few hours and end up with a figure that's equally wrong. But at least you've spent less time. So that's the process I suggest. So start with your product roadmap. At least your candidate product roadmap. The roadmap you've created together, everybody feels like, yeah, that sounds about right. It sounds about like a good, realistic plan. Okay. Then ask yourselves now, how many people with which skills would you need in order to deliver meet those goals within the time frame stated? And if you only have a development team where the team members are set, that's it. Can't change it. Can't add another development team or increase the size. then, well, the question to the development team is, are you comfortable meeting those goals? Can you do it? And that should give you a rough figure, a ballpark figure. And maybe you want to work with a range. Just to indicate, what is the investment category that we're talking about, and what's the financial risk associated with building a product as it's laid out in the product roadmap. And a wise man once said, it's better to be roughly right than to be precisely wrong. And that's the idea here, that you don't spend too much time, not too much analysis, you don't sort of go down the traditional route of writing detailed requirements up front, because if you can, hey, that's great, but then you don't use you don't require an agile model like Scrum. You can then just spec out your requirements and just, pump them out, push them out as quickly as you can. So come up with a rough estimate, a ballpark figure, and I find that for many of my clients that actually works because it's an indication if it's like a smallish, a mid-sized or large investment they have to make, and if it's maybe a mid-sized to a large one, then you can look into ways of mitigating the financial exposure. And if you don't have the people can't acquire the necessary skills, so if the figure is just simply too high, out of this world, no way we can fund this, no way we can afford this, then you have two choices. You can either adjust your roadmap, or if that's not sufficient, then it's an indication there's something wrong with your overall strategy, and you may have to pivot and change that strategy. So in that sense, you could say that the product roadmap is the final step in validating and ensuring that you have an effective overall strategy in place. So in the case of the product road mapping trip, that not the product road mapping trip, the roadmap trip, that it's really feasible. It's really viable to drive down to southern France. And this is the last one. This is the last tip I have. Regularly review the roadmap. So everything changes, right? Certainly in an agile dynamic world. And so it's only natural that the plans that we create change as well. And so my advice is to regularly look at your roadmap and see if it's still actionable, if it's still realistic, or if you need to adjust it. And in order to decide how frequently you should do it, I like to use this little grid here, this little matrix, and take into account product maturity here on the vertical axis, and the stability of the market. So how stable or how dynamic is the market, how volatile is it, how easy is it to enter the new market, how competitive is it, and what's the rate of technological change in the market. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a young product in a dynamic market, my preference would be to look at the product roadmap on a monthly basis, just so you don't forget to keep the roadmap and the backlog in sync, and you don't miss any opportunities to adjust and possibly improve your roadmap. If there's more stability, then I'd go for quarterly reviews, and even more stability, then you may get away with looking at your roadmap every 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. And again, I'd encourage you to collaborate with the key stakeholders rather than trying to sell them up an updated product roadmap, or go from stakeholder to stakeholder and say, like, here's the new version, you're happy, are you happy, you're not happy, okay, I'll rework it, and then do the whole process again, get everyone together, have a road mapping workshop, maybe look at your overarching strategy and the product performance, look at changes in the product backlog, and then figure out if and how to change the roadmap. But again, do it together, leverage the creativity of the players, and make sure that they truly buy into the roadmap. Mm-hmm. So I think those are all the slides that I've got prepared. I hope it was a little bit useful, and of course with all those great tips, we'll definitely arrive at a great destination. Right? So thank you very much. There is more information available on my website, romanpichler.com. So a number of articles, blog posts about the product roadmaps, but also some templates for you to download if you want to. Also little videos that show me talk about various aspects of an agile product roadmap. And there is a new book that I published, 10 months ago or so. I've got a copy here, by the way. So I thought for those of you who are brave enough to participate in the fishbowl, I'll give it away, or I'll ask you to give it away, Matthias. Yes, I very much look forward to your questions. And for those of you who don't have a chance to participate in the fishbowl, I'll be available afterwards at least a little bit. You can always reach out to me via email and Twitter too. So yes, thank you very much.